This is Research Like a Pro, episode 61, Analyzing Your Sources in a DNA Research Project. Welcome to Research Like a Pro, a genealogy podcast about taking your research to the next level, hosted by Nicole Dyer and Diana Elder, accredited genealogy professional. Diana and Nicole are the mother-daughter team at FamilyLocket.com and the creators of the Amazon best-selling book, Research Like a Pro, a Genealogist Guide. I'm Nicole, co-host of the podcast. Join Diana and me as we discuss how to stay organized, make progress in our research, and solve difficult cases. Let's go. Hi, everyone, and welcome to the show. I'm Nicole Dyer, co-host of the Research Like a Pro genealogy podcast, and I'm here with accredited genealogist Diana Elder and our genetic genealogist Robin Withlin. Hi, everybody.
Hi.
Hi.
We have been getting ready for our Research Like a Pro with DNA study group. Diana, do you want to talk about that?
Sure. We are so excited to start teaching some of the things that we have learned and discovered about how to actually put together a real research project using DNA. And it makes me think back to 2 years ago when we did our very first Research Like a Pro study group. You know, I had written the blog posts and I really wanted to test my theories and see if it worked on any type of genealogist. And I was kind of nervous about that study group, but oh my word, it was so fun to see everybody just take hold and make progress and do so great. And that's exactly what we're hoping with our DNA study group. You know, we've got a lot of people signed up to do it, and I'm just excited to see the same thing happen with the whole concept taking hold and people making progress with combining DNA and their traditional research. It's kind of an exciting time. I always love starting something new and different. It's going to be fun.
If you're thinking about joining our Research Like a Pro with DNA study group, as of now, there's a few spots available. When this is being aired, we're starting it the next day from now. So if you're thinking of joining last minute, go ahead and do so. There's still spots available. We'd love to have more. Well, today we're talking about analyzing your sources in a DNA research project. So that's why I've got Robin here, and we're going to be talking all about sources, information, and evidence, and then we'll talk with Diana about how she applied that to one of her projects.
So before we do that, let's do our review. This review is by Dig My Past 804, and it's titled One of Top 3. Mother and daughter are perfect, bouncing comments off each other and always a terrific topic. I listen to podcasts at night to fall asleep by, but this one is so entertaining and educational that I have to turn it off after 2 episodes or I would be up all night listening. I love that. Of my top 3, cannot choose which is best, the guys, the mother-daughter, or the extreme. Only comment for this show, whomever does your meta tags needs to add more search-friendly terms, as if you look up genealogy podcasts, Research Like a Pro does not come up.
Oh my goodness. I have been trying to fix that. I don't know how. So if anybody out there listening knows how to do good meta tags for a podcast, let me know. There is no category in Apple Podcasts for genealogy, so it's kind of tricky. But I do have it as one of our tags. Our tags are like genealogy and family history and the usual tags. Who knows? Maybe it's just Apple Podcasts, the way that they have their search work. It doesn't seem to favor the tags that I put in. Who knows? Maybe there's just too many. All right. Well, let's get started in today's episode. Kind of a review from the last time we talked about a DNA Research Like a Pro with DNA project. In episode 57, we spoke about how to look at your family tree and choose an ancestor or ancestral couple to research using DNA evidence. So if you want to kind of follow along with the whole process of researching like a pro with DNA, go back to 57 and listen to that one first. And then when you come to this one, you can learn about the next step. So first you create a research objective, and then you start combining all the information about your ancestor and the question that will further your research and analyze that evidence and the sources and the information. So let's ask Robin kind of how to do this and what she recommends for reviewing all your sources, information, and evidence.
Thanks, Nicole. Well, sources play such a vital role in genealogical research, and we all know that the quality and the quantity of those sources matter. Elizabeth Schoen Mills, who's a really renowned genealogical expert, says that sources give us information from which we select evidence for analysis. A sound conclusion may be considered proof. And we want to be able to have really sound conclusions. And DNA is such an amazing new tool in genealogy because you can make some really good conclusions, and it can be a confirming piece of evidence for the relationships that you are documenting.
Yes, that is exciting. In the past, we've just had to hope that what we found is accurate and that we won't someday later find a piece of evidence that overturns our conclusions, right? But now we can really go ahead and confirm a lot of those relationships. And of course, DNA evidence does overturn previous conclusions as well. It's just another piece to help us come to better conclusions. I like that.
I like it too. And I think something important to keep in mind is that if you learn that DNA is showing that you're not related to someone that you thought that you were related to, that does not discount the richness of the relationship that may have been in that family, because the person who raises a child is their parent and loves them and is so important. This is finding the biological origins of that family line.
That's such a good caveat because I think it is sometimes very earth-shattering to find out that your parent is not your parent. I was just talking to someone last week at Education Week who found out that his wife's parents were the adopted parents and that her biological parents were different. And it was hard. It's just a shocking discovery, but it does come down to you have two now. You have your biological parents to learn more about, and you still love and honor your adopted parents. I think it just takes some time to adjust, right?
It does. It's emotional. I found some previously unknown information in my family, and sometimes you have to take a step back emotionally and adjust to the concept and consider added value and added life experience and move ahead with the new knowledge in positive ways.
Well, if we take what we're talking about, DNA evidence, and we apply it to the Research Like a Pro process, then we're at the step right now where you analyze what you already know. So in Research Like a Pro, you dig out all of your papers and locate the sources on the family search tree or whatever online trees you might be looking at, and you just gather up everything that's already known about them. You kind of are doing a review of the literature. What has been written about this person? What has already been found about them on trees and in your own papers. So when you've gathered all of these sources together, a thorough analysis of everything found in there can help you see what you need to do next. It's kind of like your starting point for the research project. What do I already know? What's already been found? What am I going to do next? So how do we do that with our DNA evidence, Robin?
Well, after you've tested your DNA, you have this additional source. It fits right along with the other sources that you've gathered. Sometimes in getting down to the nuts and bolts of defining DNA and how it fits in, we just need to review how that goes. So basically, you're a source in the form of the DNA that can be used as evidence to either support or not support a family relationship. You have to use DNA in combination with genealogical records and known family relationships. And then it's used to give proof of those relationships. So the first thing that we need to do as we analyze the sources and the information they hold and the evidence that information provides are look at the types of sources. So we know that there's original, derivative, and authored narratives in the category of sources. So a person who takes a commercial DNA test is an original source. That's the highest quality of sources.
That's so interesting that a person is the source, because that is, a pretty unique source that we're using. Typically a source we talk about is a book or a collection of papers. With DNA evidence, it's pretty different. It's a person and the actual DNA that's within their cells of their body.
Right. It is interesting. So then sources give types of information. It can be primary information, which is firsthand information, or secondary information, something that's taken from another source, or undetermined information. We don't know, like in a newspaper article, we don't exactly know where that information came from. It came from somewhere, but we have to label it as undetermined because we can't identify the author of the source. But human original sources give their primary information in that form of DNA test results. So if you look at the raw data of your DNA, it looks like a string of letters, A, G, C, and T, which stand for adenine, thymine, cytosine, and guanine. You can't really make much sense of just that string of letters. When that string of letters is compared to the strings of letters from other people, then the DNA companies will tell you what is the same. What do you share in common with other people? Then the result is they give you a list of the people who share varying amounts of DNA with you. So that's your DNA match list. And we talk a lot about the DNA match list through the blog and through the process of using DNA and genealogy, because that's the data that we are going to be examining and using in conjunction with our genealogical records.
Wow, that was a lot of great information. I bet a lot of people maybe weren't aware that the raw test results is just a string of the letters A, T, C, and G. My dad, we were talking with him last week at Education Week about that, and it's kind of surprising to think about that that's all it is, that your DNA is just a list of all of these nucleotides and what order they appear in. And most of them are in the same order as everyone else, I think, aren't they? And there's many different points of comparison where they typically are different. And that's where they're lined up and compared with other people. And we can see, really close relatives will have a lot of those points of comparison matching up. And really distant relatives will only have 1 or 2 points of comparison that seem to match up. That makes sense that, the information there is the primary information. And then what we make it mean, that's what becomes evidence, right? Because without context and understanding some background information of DNA evidence and how it works with familial relationships, it's just information. It doesn't mean anything. But when we combine it together, that brings us to evidence.
That's right. And that evidence is pretty compelling. It's pretty strong. You're right when you said that about 99% of human DNA is the same. It's about 1% that has the variations. And the DNA testing companies test 600 to 700,000 spots in our DNA, and then they see the variations in that and how they line up with other people. The more DNA you share means the closer the relationship. The less DNA you share means it's a more distant relationship. And that's where you must have those genealogical records to validate and discern what these relationships are. DNA is inherited randomly and it recombines. And so the percentages of DNA that you share with someone in your match list, they'll vary. Before we talked about my first cousin once removed who shared 700 centimorgans with me, but he only shared maybe 300 centimorgans with my brothers and sisters. We really need to have some documentary evidence to be able to place these people in our DNA match list into the right relationships, or we might run off on a trail that is not going to lead to sound conclusions.
I love that you said that, because I have heard DNA experts speaking and they'll say the DNA doesn't lie, but our analysis of it can be wrong. I think that's what we really have to be careful of, is making sure that we understand how it works and being careful with our analysis. So let's talk about another kind of source that we use with DNA, and that is family tree information. We're always so excited when we see on our DNA match list that someone has an online tree. And why are we so excited? Because then we can try to see how we connect with them and who our most recent common ancestor could be. How has this come down through the ages to be that we connect with this person? Just like other sources, we have to look at those online trees and analyze them. One tree might be fabulous and be put together with so much good research, and another tree could be sort of speculative and not have anything backing it up. So just like all of our other sources, we have to analyze them and look to see how good the information is in there and how accurate we think it is. I know that I was looking at an online tree that I seemed to be connected with, and the ancestor was completely wrong. And I knew that because I had done a ton of research on that line. And it just kind of pointed out to me that we have to do our own verification of those family trees as we're working with our DNA results so we don't get headed off in the wrong direction. Let me just kind of recap and see if I understand this right. Okay, so the original source is the person. Then an authored source would be the family tree, because the family tree is the combination of all sorts of different things, that people have put together, original and derivative sources. And so we generally say a family tree is an authored source. And the more accurate it is, the more credence we can give to that information. So if we don't have a tree for any of our matches, then what do we do with that scenario, Robin?
Great question. As I look at my DNA match list, the vast majority of the people do not have a family tree attached to their DNA results. So what you need to do is some good traditional genealogical research. Look for obituaries that mention that person. Look for other records, census records, city directories, other online family trees that may connect in with that family line, and use those other trees as a hint to build the tree for this match that is a wonderful, possible good match. The other thing is that you can write to the person. We've talked about that quite a bit. See if they know anything. Sometimes that person doesn't know anything about their family history. You have to put in some time to build the tree. You don't have to go into super depth in building that tree. It can be a more of a surface build. Just make sure that you're using accurate information to link the generations and the siblings and the other people together.
That makes sense. When we're making a quick and dirty tree, it can be easy to use less credible sources. But I think as long as we are able to find at least one good piece of information that comes from an original source that links the generations going back from parent to child and child to parent, then that can help us to make sure that we're not making big errors.
That's right. And I wanted to touch back on that concept that you are a source and your DNA is information that can be used as evidence to prove a relationship. So it's kind of like you have a book that you find on the shelf at the library. That's the source. You open up the book and then you find information in the book. And if it can help build the case of the relationship between two people, then you use that information as evidence to prove a relationship. DNA is the same way. You've got a source, you've got information. How will you use that to help prove a relationship? So you just have to remember to use it in conjunction with genealogical records to have a sound conclusion.
I love that comparison to the book because we are all used to doing that, pulling out a book and getting information out of it and using it as evidence. It's just a little bit more tricky wrapping our minds around DNA. So thank you for that explanation. I'm going to remember that we are like the book. The information inside of it is our DNA, and then we use that as evidence. As genealogists and those listening to the podcast, we just have to hear this over and over, and we have to use it to learn it. So if you're feeling like you may never figure out how to use DNA, just be patient with yourself. Every little bit builds. And the more you hear it, the more you read it, the more you learn it, you're going to get a solid foundation. Just remember back to when you were a baby genealogist and a census was like brand new to you. And now maybe you know everything there is to know about a census, right? So in the future, we're going to know everything there is to know about DNA, and we'll be such experts. And we'll look back and think, remember when we didn't know anything about DNA?
And it's a great point. Everybody starts somewhere. And so just the fact that you're listening into the podcast, you've got a basis there, and you'll keep learning and applying the information in your own research, and it will it will become more and more familiar, and you'll be able to use it with more and more expertise.
So, Robin, I have a lot of people who are new with using DNA for family history research, and they want to know, how can knowing that you're a match to another person help you identify an ancestor?
That's a great question. When you share DNA with someone who's related to you on a specific line of a family, then that can be used as evidence to be able to prove that an historical person is your in common biological ancestor or not. For example, if you have a second cousin that is identified from a DNA match list, then you can tell that you share great grandparents. So your most recent common ancestor is that great grandparent or the great grandparent couple. Those great grandparents pass DNA down through their children, which are your grandparents, down to their grandchildren, which are your parents, and then down to you, which are the great grandchildren. So it kind of makes a triangle. You and your second cousin share DNA back to your great grandparents. And you can use those kind of comparisons with people in various relationships and go back and see which ancestral couple is your in common ancestors. And like Diana's been using the Cox family as in her research project, they're quite a ways back. So she's using a lot of people to help substantiate that relationship because it's farther back and she's using smaller segments. The amazing thing about DNA is that as she builds the case with all of these people, she can come to a pretty sound conclusion who Rachel Cox's father is. It's exciting.
I love that you talked about a triangle. That's a really good visual. And I think, when we see that we are a match to a person and we don't know who the common ancestor is between us, it's kind of like we have just a piece of the triangle. We have two legs of the triangle. We know that we're connected to a common ancestor. We don't know who it is, but we know we're connected to each other through our matching DNA. So then it's our job to go and see if we can figure out who that common ancestor is through kind of doing a lot of research on the matches family tree to figure out if any of their surnames are in common with ours, and doing that pedigree triangulation and matching it up.
You're right. You use the shared matches list to see who else shares DNA with you and that person, and that can help you narrow down which branch of the family you are connected on.
What about with Y-DNA? How do we do that? We've been talking a little bit about the autosomal DNA match list and triangulating that way. Is it the same with Y-DNA?
With Y-DNA, the company gives you a list of people that share the same basic DNA with you on a male's Y chromosome. They look at bases in the DNA where there's a repeat of the letters. And I kind of think those are the STR or the short tandem repeats. And I kind of think of it as a stutter a little bit. That helps me remember the STR, where you've got sequences of letters that might say GATA, GATA, GATA 10 times. And then somebody else, it also says that 10 times. And then as they compare those two people's DNA, they can tell how closely they are related because they will have a similar number of repeats at the same markers. Then that report will give a genetic distance. Basically, the smaller the genetic distance means the closer the relative, or the fewer number of generations since that mutation occurred in that repeated genetic code.
Great. So we kind of have a little bit of a different way of looking at that Y-DNA. We're not doing as much of the shared matches, but we're looking more at our genetic distance and how many generations it has been, and then trying to triangulate and see if we can find the same patrilineal ancestor for each match on our match list. And what about, how do we analyze our mitochondrial DNA?
Mitochondrial DNA is interesting. It's passed just from mothers to their children, and then women pass it on to their children. When you take a mitochondrial DNA test, it will give you a mitochondrial DNA haplogroup. The mitochondrial haplogroup may go back for thousands of years And so it tells you that you're biologically connected to other people who have the same haplogroup, but it doesn't measure things in such a close genealogical time frame that it can be extremely useful. It's helpful, especially in unknown parentage research, because you can tell if you're on the right track or not, but it doesn't give us as much information at this point in time that will really help us define who, let's say, our second great grandparents are, especially if it's not on that matrilineal line.
I think it's a good thing to point out that it's used for more ancient comparisons between the matrilineal ancestors. And I have seen it used to eliminate a possible mother in a family tree by saying, this group that descended from this woman has a different haplogroup than this group that descended from another possible mother. So they're not related. So I think it can be used in the process of elimination to help in that way.
Exactly. That's an excellent way of using that in your research.
Let's talk a little bit about my case study, because you mentioned that I'm using the Cox family for this. And so I think it's just helpful to visualize how this all comes together with an actual case study. I chose to do a study group, research like a pro study group in the spring, and combining DNA with my traditional genealogical research. And I researched Benjamin Cox and Rachel Cox a few years ago. And I decided that it would be really fun to try to use DNA to prove this connection. When I went back and did my timeline analysis, because that's the step that you do when you're revisiting your research, I remembered all the great things that I had found and why I thought Rachel was the daughter of Benjamin in the very first place. So the first record I had of her was her marriage record, which was in 1848 in Navarro County, Texas. And, this was Texas. They didn't list the name of the father, and so I didn't have any clues from that. And of course, there's no birth records at that time. There's no church records pointing out who her father was. So what I had to do was look at all the Cox men that were living there in the area. Who else is in Navarro County in 1848 that could be her father? And there were 2 or 3 other men, and one was a James Cox. I thought at first was her father. Doing all the research on him, I eliminated him for a variety of reasons. And then there was this Benjamin Cox, and he was there in the county on a 1846 tax list. And another really interesting record was that Benjamin Cox and Rachel's husband, who she married in 1848, Monroe Schultz, they were working together on a road. They were road commissioners. So I thought, oh, okay, so this means they were in proximity. That may have been how she met her husband. It just was another little clue there. And I also realized that Benjamin had this migration pattern from Indiana. It was Ohio, Indiana, Arkansas, Texas, and guess what? Rachel's birthplace was always Indiana. And that seemed to really put her into this family. The only problem with this was that, we have the census records before 1850 and there's no names. So 1830 census, 1840 census, there's a place in those census records for Rachel as a female in the household, but no name. And so, to this point, it was all pretty much, okay, this is what I think. It's kind of a conjecture. Is there anything else backing this up with DNA? And with DNA, when Throughlinez was introduced, I went on my Ancestry DNA results through Throughlinez and saw that I had 66 other people who were my DNA matches who also had a connection to Benjamin Cox through family trees and Ancestry's algorithm, putting that all together. I decided that I would take this as my project and see if I could really narrow this down using DNA. Anyway, in a nutshell, that is my project. And so I have all my traditional research, and then I have all these DNA matches that supposedly go back to Benjamin Cox. So I'm pretty excited to keep working on this and trying to use those DNA matches to verify my relationships. One of the things that Robin taught us to analyze this, when we're analyzing our traditional research, we use our timeline. analyze and put this stuff into something that can be viewable and visible and help us visualize? And Robin taught us to chart our DNA matches. And this was absolutely brilliant for me, learning how to do this on Lucidchart. So Robin, I just have to ask you, how did you even come to using Lucidchart? Did you learn that from someone else, or did you figure it out for yourself? I'm just so curious.
Well, I learned it in taking some of the Institute classes that are a week long. And I liked how the charts were put together in some of the instructors' lessons and asked. And then they also recommended Lucidchart as a great way of putting things together in a visual. Actually, for many years, I've wondered, is there some software out there that can help me just draw a pedigree chart so that it looks professional and it can contain the information that I want? And Lucidchart does all of that, and it's affordable. I was just thrilled when I learned about it.
I decided to use my Cox project and do this. So I put on my Lucidchart, Benjamin at the top, and then I did the little boxes all the way down with my relationship to Rachel Cox, with each his Rachel and then her son and then his, all the way down to me. And then I lined up some of my other matches because they had trees, through lines showed trees. And then the thing that was really fun was to do some of the analysis process. And I would look at how many centimorgans they shared with me. And I would use the shared centimorgan project tool to see if it made sense. And because I had this Lucidchart and I could see specifically that they would be, okay, my third cousin once removed. And then I could see if the centimorgans for third cousin once removed lined up. That was really helpful. I felt like that was a great way to do the analysis to see if the relationship probabilities match the relationships I had drawn or I had visualized on my Lucidchart. So thank you. Before that, I just couldn't see any way to make sense of everything as well. I've been really excited to have that tool.
Sometimes when you're building those family trees, you're not exactly sure what the solid relationship is between you and people that you are on your match list. And you may even get them into the wrong generation because remember, there's a range of the amount of DNA that's shared between somebody who's like a third cousin once removed, for example. I did one project and I figured out later on as we got everything confirmed that I had some people in a different generation. So then I was able to take that whole section of Lucidchart and bring it so it was accurately representing the generations that were involved.
Yes, I love the ability to edit it because we do not know. And I love that you can use a dotted line to say this is a hypothetical relationship because you're exactly right. Sometimes we don't know. Like I knew my line was absolutely accurate because I researched it for years, but other people, I'm not sure. I love that we can do a little bit of playing with the lines to show really confirmed relationships or things that we're just hypothesizing. I just love having a visual. For me, I feel like with DNA research, we have got to have something that we can look at and see to help us make sense. So just to kind of recap, because we're coming to the end of this episode, we've been talking all about today analyzing our DNA. For doing a DNA research project, we analyze with our timeline analysis, our traditional research, and then we can use a visual such as Lucidchart to analyze all the DNA matches and see if things are fitting together. Is there anything that you want to add to this, Nicole or Robin, before we wrap it up?
I just want to really encourage people to jump in and get started. Even if you don't feel like you're an expert, if you can just do a little bit and try creating a chart, even if it's on paper or with Post-it notes, do something so that you can connect the people who are on your DNA match list into the relationships that you know of, that you can trace back to your known ancestors. And that will give you confidence and skills that can be used in working with the people that you don't know in your DNA match list. I know you can do it. Everybody gets started at some point, and This will really be a great addition to your genealogical research.
I just was thinking about the process of doing a Research Like a Pro project, like Diana was sharing with her Cox example, and how, if you're not including DNA evidence, you just are building a timeline and reviewing the quality of all of your sources. It's so great to add in the DNA element here. And I love how, Diana, you looked at through lines to see what was kind of suggested by that as part of this gathering up all of the sources and seeing what's already known or at least suggested by through lines, and using that to help you kind of analyze, are those matches a good match, and do they share enough centimorgans that you can use that as evidence, and what you might need to do in the future. It really does inform the whole Research Like a Pro process, being able to see what you already know or what others have hypothesized, right? And in this case, we're seeing the ancestry as hypothesizing that you and all of these 66 matches, is that how many there were, are all descended from Benjamin Cox. Now it's your job to really go and say that this is proven or not after you go through all of the steps that you need to do in the Research Like a Pro process to really evaluate the evidence and then turn it into actual proof. It's exciting to have a starting point with our DNA research and to have some suggestions from through lines and see these cousin matches and see how they could possibly relate, and then be able to take that to the next step, which is verifying the genealogical research that links you to those people and links you all back to the same ancestor.
Yeah, and one thing I just neglected to mention was that I actually created an objective for this project. I think sometimes you look at all of our matches and we just kind of play around with them and we don't really do anything with them because we don't have an objective to focus us in on a specific project. Having the focus of just proving this relationship has been so beneficial rather than just jumping around through my matches. So I'm excited to kind of work through this project because I have, just a few others that I need to work on next. So this is fun.
Yeah, it is helpful to focus in. And in the show notes, I do have a link to our last episode that was about DNA, episode 57, where we discuss how to form an objective when you're doing a DNA research project. So make sure you listen to that one as well.
Also, I wanted to mention we'll have in the show notes a blog post about 3 ways to chart your DNA matches that Robin did. Because if you're like me, you listen to this and you think, okay, I just need to see something to learn how to do this. You can go to the show notes or go on Family Locket and put in DNA charting and find some real specific helps to learn how to do all the things that we've talked about today. So good luck, everyone, with your DNA research.
All right. Well, thanks, Robin, for coming on today.
Thank you. It's been great to talk to everybody.
We hope that you will join us again in our upcoming episodes about researching like a pro with DNA and hear how to follow an entire project through the end as you incorporate your DNA evidence into your project. So we'll talk to you again next week. Bye-bye.
Bye.
All right. Bye-bye, everyone.
Thank you for listening to Research Like a Pro with Diana Elder, accredited genealogy professional, and Nicole Dyer. We hope that something you heard today will help you make progress in your own genealogy research. If you like what you heard, please leave us a review on iTunes or Stitcher, or visit our website, familylocket.com, to contact us. You can find our book, Research Like a Pro, A Genealogist Guide, on Amazon.com and other booksellers. We hope you'll start now to research like a pro.